All
I don't know
right.
if I have it down at all, but,
Our
it's different.
intent for today is to identify emotional control. It's really hard to know if your emotions are being controlled without understanding what it looks like and how it is accomplished.
Yeah.
So once again, we're really trying to educate our audience today on what this looks like, because guess what? We all try to control other people's emotions, and we have all been victims of having our emotions controlled. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. My book is for sale, everybody, on Amazon. Right now, the paperback and Kindle versions of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook, is available for purchase on Amazon, which is super, super exciting.
Very.
Very exciting. The hardback cover link for pre-sales should go live, I believe, here in the next couple of weeks. In about 3 weeks. We're just waiting on the final endorsements to come through on that before we approve the print, which is exciting. And then my editor, producer of the audiobook, his name is Greg, let me know that we should get the audio files finalized here in the next couple of weeks. They are actively working on that, tearing it apart and putting it back together again, which is what editors do best, for sure.
That's why they have a job.
Right? My microphone is trying to run away from me here. There we go. So anyway, I should be getting finalized files of the audiobook to sign off on starting for us next week, which is what, July? Ooh, it's going to be like on the 24th of July, Pioneer Day. Whoop, 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 whoop. All right, so I've got that coming as well. And so as soon as the audiobook files have all been finalized and pieced together, then the audiobook will also go up, I believe, during this pre-sale time period. So if you want to earn some Daisy Girl merchandise for free, email us proof of purchase of your book during this pre-sales period, and we will mail you some free Daisy Girl merchandise. So when you email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com, that is communications with an S. I sound a little drunk there. But anyway, email us at daisygirlcommunications.com. Make sure you also give us your mailing address so that we can mail you some free merchandise. We've got a lot of really fun little doodads. If you want to see what some of the merchandise is, please head over to our website, daisygirlcommunications.com, and take a look. A lot of the water bottles and tumblers and whatnot will be going live around September 6th as well for sale on our website. So keep an eye out for that, because pretty soon you'll be able to buy some of our more expensive merchandise on the website. We've got some duffel bags with the Daisy Girl logo. We've got Unpacking Mormonism merchandise. We've got Raising Crazy merchandise. Y'all, I had my Raising Crazy logo etched on a beer glass and a stemless wine glass. Because if you are raising crazy kiddos, or you are feeling crazy while raising kiddos, you need a drink. And so I've got some beer glasses and stemless wine glasses. It can be for your orange juice or for your tequila sunrise, whichever feels more appropriate to you. But we are really excited. The other announcement is we are on the bestseller lists. We're not number 1 yet. I think we were number 8 when I checked this morning, and it is July 22nd, I believe. The day that we're recording this is July 22nd. So for you, you're going to be hearing this in August. But we are currently, as of July 22nd, number 8 in the bestseller list. And we are still in the top 5. So we are number 1 in one category of number 1 for new releases, and number 3 and 4 on the other category for new releases. So my book is selling hot. Get it while it's hot. And we can't wait to see you there. Other than that, welcome back to our episode of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. If you haven't noticed, I'm joined by my sexy husband, Mason, as the co-host. Mason.
I'm here.
And obviously, I'm Sarah Westbrook. So if that's not obvious to you, you must already be drinking from one of my Raising Crazy glasses.
Or you're new. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Yes, or you're new. That's true as well. And today we are talking about emotional control. And that story that we keep saying we're going to tell but haven't told yet is coming at you today.
It's going to be a letdown by the time we get there.
I know, right? Everybody's like built up. They're like, whoa.
Not much of a story.
What's going on? And then, okay. So we're going to tell you that story today. And then next week, we're going to tie it all together. And that will finish out our cult series as well as season 1 of Unpacking Mormonism.
If we get through enough of the emotional control today. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I might have just lied. We'll see. We're going to make this a long episode so that way we get through it, because you cannot turn me into a liar. I cannot turn me into a liar. I already do that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Alrighty.
So, it's super exciting. You know, it's been fun doing this cult series. Our producer, Alex, keeps telling us, like, he sent several texts now, second best downloads of the whole, of
our
ever.
lifetime, right?
And then 2 days later, he'd be like, second most downloads ever. And it's been really exciting. And I'm sure some of that is because of the anticipation for your book. Some of it is that we're dealing with a topic that is certainly not just Mormonism. And it really has been about educating people and recognizing how we allow ourselves to be controlled. So hopefully this is very helpful for all of us, whether it's connected to religion or not. But it has been exciting. We're so grateful for all of you that have listened in and enjoyed what we have to put out there. Hopefully it's helpful, and we love having you guys here.
Yeah, well, and shout out to Washington State. We have had over 100% growth in Washington State. So I don't know who y'all are, but thank you so much for tuning in. We are honored to have you. But overall, our regular returning listens are up just over 50%, which is huge, everybody. So we are trying really hard to get up to 22,000 downloads before season 2. We really want to finish up season 1 with 22,000 downloads in 1 year. That would be awesome. So help us reach our goal. You can do that by sharing our podcast on your social media sites, sharing it with your friends. You know, you can get right into Spotify or Apple or whatever platform you're utilizing to listen to our podcasts, and you can share the link to people if you think that a certain episode would really stand out to them. We would absolutely love that. And hey, if you send us a screenshot of proof that you have shared our podcast with somebody else, feel free to blur out the names. I don't need to know the personal business, but send me your email address and I will send you free Daisy Girl merchandise as a thank you for your shares.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
It's also not too late if you're really interested in being part of the book army. It's close, but it's not too late.
Right.
If you want to pre-order the book still, and let us know so that you can get access to the digital copy right now. And then you get to leave reviews for us and really help to spread the message. We're still in a place where we can do that. So let us know. And we'll get you hooked up.
FYI, September 3rd is the last day you can sign up to be on our book army. Signing up for the book army comes with a certain amount of responsibilities. in the sense that we are going to bug you for reviews, because reviews are the lifeblood of any book.
We're not going to have to bug anybody for that, right? They're all going to
Nobody.
do it on their own.
Yeah, well, actually, Book
and
Sirens...
some already have. It's pretty awesome. So thank you for those of you that have done that.
And Book Sirens is a babysitter for your reviews. So as soon as you're done with the book, you get into Book Sirens, you leave your review for Amazon in Book Sirens, and then you leave your review separate on Goodreads. And what ends up happening is on September 6th, when those reviews can be shared to Amazon, you will get an email with like the easy click directions on how to transport your review from Book Sirens and put it on Amazon. So
Nice.
it really, if the people
That's for people
on our
like
book,
me. You dumb it down so it's really easy. That's for people like me, right there.
it's not about dumbing it down. It's about just remembering.
Yes.
Like if you finish a book 2 months in advance, it's really hard to remember to leave a review. So
Or how much it impacted you or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
This is our babysitter, so you can leave the review right away, and then it's easy to transport it. But the purpose of the Book Army, my Book Army peeps are there to help promote the book so that the book ends up in more hands. And I want to read a review. We will
get to this emotional control.
Yeah, we will get to this.
Shortly.
I'm trying to control your emotions by increasing your excitement about my project so that you'll help me share it.
I think the word you're looking for is influence your emotions. We're trying to influence your emotions so that you can be excited with us and help us spread the excitement and the message of both the book and the podcast.
So our very first review on Goodreads came from a member of the Book Army, somebody that is helping to market the book and bring it to the people and increase our audience so that our audience can find it. And what Jean said is, this book is a must-read for anyone who has endured a painful childhood in a dysfunctional home. Miss Westbrook's autobiography is a gripping story of how an emotionally abused child transcended her early life to become a self-realized adult, told with unflinching honesty. Along the way, we get a fascinating look at the inner workings of the Mormon Church and its often destructive power over its members. I enjoyed reading Trauma Bonded and believe it will help people who have endured a similar upbringing. So, Jean, thank you so much for that review.
I got chills. They're multiplying. And I'm losing control.
Uh-oh. He's losing control.
From the power
We better.
she's supplying. That was awesome. That was a terrific.
Well, and I was going to say,
I'm touched and moved.
You've got
and I've heard it before, so.
Yes. So thank you so much, Jean. But yes, what the goal of the Book Army is to help promote the book so that we can get it into the hands of people who do not yet know it exists, so that it has the ability to connect with the world at large. And I'm a huge dreamer, you all. So please, if you want to be on the Book Army, you have until September 3rd to sign up for it. And then copies of the early digital copy will be taken down shortly after September 6th. I want to say like September 13th or something like that.
So you got time, but you don't got much of it.
All righty.
All right.
Let's
talk
get
about
into
emotional control.
Emotional control, now that we've spent 12 minutes advertising ourselves.
Well, and we're excited because we're getting close to the end of this cult series, and it's been wonderful.
Yes. And I'm
really
just enjoying tooting my own horn here. My marketing exec, Nicole, was like, toot your own horn. That's how you get this thing sold. So I'm here tooting. You
are a cute tutor.
You know what? Thank you, because it took me a little while to feel comfortable tooting in front of you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I can understand that. It takes me, it was a little uncomfortable for me to toot in front of you too, so.
I mean, I got it down before we got married, at least, but.
I don't think I got it down before that.
All right.
I don't know if I have it down at all, but,
Our
it's different.
intent for today is to identify emotional control. It's really hard to know if your emotions are being controlled without understanding what it looks like and how it is accomplished.
Yeah.
So once again, we're really trying to educate our audience today on what this looks like, because guess what? We all try to control other people's emotions, and we have all been victims of having our emotions controlled. And so I'm going to spend the first couple of minutes of today's podcast, after tooting my own horn, of course, explaining a little bit to you about what the emotion hormones are in our brain and what they control. I'm also going to explain how one gains control over the emotional process and how this can be used ethically and unethically. Because I'm going to be honest, in my practice as a mental health counselor, one of the things that I'm doing is shifting perception and perspectives in order for my clients to have a new emotional experience. And the reason for that for me is I have to be really cautious in making sure that I am ethical. I'm doing it to help the client better themselves and meet their own goals for living rather than my goals for them. And so we're really
that's a powerful difference.
Yeah, we've got it's a fine line, and it's one that I'm constantly checking in with when I'm in my professional practice. Now, when I'm in with my kids, how well do my ethics do? Well, they'll let me know as they get older and tell me how I fucked up their lives, which all parents do. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not trying to put a negative stigma here. I'm doing the best I can as a parent. But hey, the more aware I've become over how this works, the better I perform as a parent.
Absolutely. You talk about parenting. I think of organizations, even churches or religious organizations. I don't know that they're deliberately doing a lot of these things, but if you're not stepping back and recognizing that you have the power to do those things, if as a religious organization, I've given you some of my power because I believe what you're teaching, it is then important for that religious organization to step back and, okay, what are we doing with this power that they've given us? And I think that a lot of organizations haven't had to check themselves for a long time. And so you end up with cultural things that they're just part of what has grown because we're not thinking about these kinds of things or are completely unaware of them. And so we're utilizing things that can be very harming to people and not even recognizing it.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I don't think that, for us, we talk about Mormonism, but I think that for the most part, religions have good intentions.
Yeah, I agree.
When they are exercising this emotional control. But as the cliche goes, the highway to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't think, our experiences within Mormonism, I don't think there are very many people. Are there some who have bad intentions to gain emotional control? Hell yeah, of course.
I'm sure.
Hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook. But I don't think that speaks to the majority. But if you don't know that you're doing it, if you don't understand the implications of what you're doing in order to get a certain outcome, you have no power to change.
Right.
The other cliche that I love is you can't do better when you don't know better.
Right.
So do better when you know better. And that's really our goal today. We're not trying to criminalize religious organizations, although we're going to get a little snarky because, let's face it, I'm a snarky human.
Well, you probably will, yeah.
I'm definitely going to get snarky, which, y'all, the Westbrook family hates about me, but I embrace it about me. I love it. I love me. It took me a long time to get to loving me, but I love me and I'm not changing it for anybody. Nobody, not even your uncle. Alrighty. So before we can talk about what emotional control is, I think it's important to have a basic foundation of some neuroscience. Now, I am going to oversimplify this for you because if I start getting into, it comes from the hypothalamus or the adrenal glands and blah, 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 I'm going to lose some of my listeners. You don't need a doctorate level understanding of this stuff. And to be honest, I don't have a doctoral level understanding of this stuff. But go to the show notes. I left a peer-reviewed resource on there that talks about this if you want more specific information of these neurochemicals and how it works in your brain and the parts of your brain that excrete this shit. Yeah, Mason, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, we're going to talk about loading the language here in just a minute, and we've talked about it a little bit in previous podcasts, but basically loading the language is meant to kind of get you bogged down in the wording so that the emotional experience can either be avoided or controlled. Sometimes the same thing can happen with this. Like if you
or accentuated, it can be avoided, exaggerated, controlled.
Right.
It's to shift the level of intensity at which you experience your emotions.
Right. So in a sense, this is a similar thing. If you take something that is complicated and you simplify it so that people can understand it better, you're trying to avoid loading the language in that you are if you make it too scientific for what your audience can handle, then they become bogged down in the language and cannot understand the meaning of what you're trying to share. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I don't think bogged down. So I'm going to change what you said just a little bit because I'm me and you're you, and that's what we do here.
I'm going to keep my comments to myself.
Well, in my field of expertise, I want to explain this accurately for my field.
Sure.
But when I start going off a medical tangent and Mason's like, no, Sarah, that is not how that works. So I promise this challenging the way Mason is saying things happens in reverse. Mason will challenge the things that I say. Y'all just don't get to see it because we're not an anesthesia
That's right.
or a nursing podcast.
Because here we're talking about mental health,
Mental and
you
behavioral
have
health,
the
right.
expertise that I don't have.
One of the things that I'm trying to avoid by oversimplifying this is I think we've all been in that experience where like a doctor or somebody comes in, an engineer, an architect, an electrician, we've got somebody that comes in and they're talking about a field that we're not expert in, and they use the professional vernacular. Mm-hmm. And because they're utilizing vocabulary words that are accurately descriptive of what's going on, but with an audience that doesn't know those words, those vocabulary words, it just gets really confusing. So what I'm trying to do right now is introduce the audience to some of the vernacular, but give it definitions that are accurate but simplified.
Absolutely.
For those of my audience that would like to increase their understanding of what's going on, I've provided the resource that is going to be highly academic, still easy to understand, but you're going to be able to grow this a little bit more in that way. Whereas loading the language has a piece of changing the word's definition in order to gain some sort of to confirm cognitive bias,
right,
or to control the emotion. I am in no way trying to change the objective facts and the peer-reviewed accepted vernacular on describing this.
Right.
So I would not say, if I'm explaining something in a way that your average person doesn't have these vocabulary words in their vocabulary because this is a very specific field of study, that's not loading the language. It's making the information user friendly. So there is a difference
Absolutely.
there.
That makes perfect sense, and I appreciate the explanation because, it's just trying to understand. Simplifying something so that people understand the way that it is meant to be understood is completely different than changing the words or the meaning of words so that they understand things the way that you want them to understand them.
Absolutely. And I feel that it's important for me, as I'm explaining new concepts, to not have it be, hey, just take my word for it, here's the study.
Right.
We were actually in a conversation, or you were in a conversation with your uncle. I wasn't feeling super great. You were in a conversation with your uncle, and I provided the data from the research, and I'm always willing to say, well, it's from this peer-reviewed journal, it's from this source, it's from here.
Right.
And we actually went back and say, hey, Sarah misquoted the data. This is what it actually said, and we're sorry for that, because it's very important. So one of the things that I want to make sure that you're doing as you're checking in with, is this emotional control or not, is check the data. Again, one of the anecdotes to this is get curious, look at it from multiple perspectives, and check in with the data.
Right.
And to do so honestly. And the only person who can know if you're doing that honestly is you. What are your intentions? You're the only person that knows. All right, so back to this. Let's talk about the 4 basic mood-inducing hormones that are in your brain. The first one is known as the regulator. It's the mood regulator, and that hormone is serotonin. Serotonin is the hormone that helps you feel safe, happy, calm, and focused, okay? When we are treating anxiety and depression, the very first hormone that most psychiatrists will target is the serotonin hormones in your brain because it is what helps you feel, again, happy, calm, at peace, focused. A lot of times ADHD symptoms are actually just anxiety, and when your anxiety is really high, you might present with ADHD-like symptoms that make it difficult to focus, or with depression, you might feel a lack of motivation. Now, we do have a different hormone that really pushes on that motivation that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But when you get depressed or anxious, it's hard to focus or sustain your focus. And so by increasing or decreasing serotonin, depending on what you've got going on, we can help regulate that. So I want you to think of serotonin as the happy hormone, the safe hormone, and the hormone regulator. Serotonin is the regulator. The second hormone that we're going to talk about in your brain is dopamine. Dopamine is your feel-good hormone. It's the one that gives you the feelings of pleasure, of satisfaction, and of motivation. So people that have a deficit of dopamine in their brains, one of the ways that we are able to go, there's a deficit of dopamine most likely is because we see people who have zero motivation to do things. Dopamine is your pleasure hormone. It's the attaboy hormone. It's the I had sex, ding, 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 dopamine rush. It feels good and we want to do that again.
Yeah, we do.
It's also the hormone that when I tell my kids, hey, you did a great job or you put a lot of effort into that and I'm really proud of you, they get a little dopamine push, which is
right.
Yay, I did it, which reinforces behaviors that we want to see.
Right.
Again, that's how you manipulate behavior is people are getting dopamine rushes for behaviors that are not serving them well. That's where this gets really, really complicated. So if we can control somebody's dopamine, we can control a lot of things.
So meaning that you can
them.
get a dopamine release for both positive and negative things?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. If I'm giving my son positive reinforcement for beating the shit out of the dog, he's probably
getting a
going to
dopamine release.
develop,
Gotcha.
right, he's probably going to develop some permanent aggression towards animal tendencies because he gets the feel-good hormone firing when it's not something we want the feel-good hormone firing for. So, dopamine is your feel-good hormone, okay? The next hormone we talk about is the adrenaline hormone, and I like to call this one the watchdog hormone. It is your adrenaline hormone that activates your amygdala, which we've talked about in the past. It is the hormone that will increase your blood pressure, your heart rate. It'll not decrease your respiratory rate. It will decrease your oxygen saturation, but increase your respiration rate because things are getting diverted to your major muscle groups and flowing away from your brain, so on and so forth.
It actually dilates your bronchioles and your airways so that you can bring more air in.
Right, so you bring more air in, but less of that air is getting delivered to the brain because it's going to energize your muscle groups, I believe. Yeah. All right, so that's your adrenaline. Your adrenaline is your watchdog hormone. And the last one is our oxytocin. It is our love hormone. Isn't it oxytocin that they use to also bring on labor pains?
Yes.
Yeah, oxytocin. It's good stuff. If you want to go into labor quicker, you get some piggy oxytocin flowing through your body and it brings on very painful contractions. I would much prefer to do that all natural. But our oxytocin is our love hormone. It's our connection hormone. It's our bonding hormone. And it is our empathy hormone. So when you see somebody who struggles connecting with the experiences of others, most likely there is an oxytocin deficit. In fact, the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, have demonstrated and utilize in their clinic nasal spray oxytocin for clients who are having a very difficult time practicing empathy while we're training them in the Gottman communication skills. We give you a shot of oxytocin, wait a couple of minutes, and then have the couple re-engage in the communication. And I'm telling y'all, I've seen this in my own clinic. It is incredible to see the shift of here's some synthetic oxytocin. How do you communicate? And we utilize that to try and change the way your brain functions so that your brain will begin to function and repair its oxytocin deficit.
Wow.
So one of the things, Mason, that in the story that we're going to tell here in a little bit is, one of the things that you come away with is my dad just can't seem to understand me. That's because, in my opinion, this is Sarah's theory. I cannot state this as objective fact. This is my theory, is that your dad was probably punished for being empathetic and an emotional being in his early childhood years, so he learned to shut it off. And this is my theory for what has happened. And I'm saying it's my theory because I'm pretty certain I've read some data on it, but I don't have that data handy. I'd have to go back in and re-look at it and make sure that I was quoting it correctly. So for today, this is Sarah's theory. That I'm pretty confident in, is that men in general, Brene Brown talks about, my family would rather see me die on my white horse than demonstrate vulnerability. That's because society has trained us that men are allowed to be angry or content, that they're the providers, they're the protectors. They cannot fail because if they fail, the whole family unit gets in trouble. And subsequently, men have been trained in society, in religion, in all kinds of groups for eons and eons and eons that they are not allowed to have vulnerable emotions in front of anybody without being a pussy, a wimp, weak, horrible. And that even us women, we're like, I need you to be more vulnerable. I need you to connect with my emotions. But then when the man does that, they get punished for it. This is the result of our shame society within gender roles. And so a lot of men really struggle with the release of oxytocin. Now, women get it, I'm going to say, a little bit more naturally in their biology in order for us to keep our young alive.
Yeah.
So, for example, the oxytocin hormone, when I'm nursing or feeding my baby a bottle, and this happens bottle-fed babies and nursing babies, okay? It happens for both. As I look into my baby and I'm feeding them and they look up at me and they're all cute and satisfied and we make eye contact for more than 20 seconds, I get a nice little oxytocin drop and baby gets a little oxytocin rush and we're all like, oh, you're so cute. And the baby goes grrr at me and I go grrr back at baby and it's like oxytocin out the wazoo. I am bonding. I am loving. I am connecting with the baby, despite the fact that they scream for hours in my sleep. This is the oxytocin is the protective hormone that keeps sleep-deprived mothers from killing their young. Okay. And this also happens when we talk about therapy animals. I actually have this study in my office, so if anybody's interested in it, shoot me an email. I will forward it to you. But that is why therapy animals and emotional support animals reduce feelings of anxiety, is you look into that animal's eyes, you and animal make eye contact. That eye contact is sustained for more than 20 seconds. You and the animal get an oxytocin release, which soothes. It is the soothing hormone. It will soothe your anxiety so that it can then trigger the other hormones to do their things so that you feel calmer. So for those of you who are like, oh my gosh, every dog is a therapy dog. Yeah, you're kind of right. If you've got a dog that'll make eye contact with people for more than 20 seconds, it is absolutely a soothing experience. There's neuroscience that we can test that sustains the value of mammalian animals that have the capacity to maintain eye contact with you for more than 20 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to go back just quickly. You were talking about the messages that men and women both receive. And I just finished reading or listening to Brene Brown's, I think it was her first book. I thought it was just me, but it isn't, which really delves into shame and her initial research about shame. And it's almost entirely about women. But in the final chapter, she really delves into what the messages are for men as well. And it was poignant. It was hard to hear. It was very helpful. Just because recognizing the messages that we receive, like, it's almost cliche. Don't you cry, boy. I'll give you something to cry about, kind of a thing.
Right. Man up. Dry up those tears. Don't cry like a girl. Don't be a pussy. Yeah.
Exactly. If you spend your whole life teaching the man to be tough because you think that's what they need to survive, and toughness is important in a lot of situations, but if that's what you're teaching them, and then you punish them for not being able to get in touch with their emotions, you're sending mixed messages, and it's very, very difficult to manage, to deal with, to come down from. The idea, I'd rather see you die on your white horse than fall off of it. Those are toxic messages, but they're very real and pervasive messages. Yeah.
I think that we need to make sure that we put the, I thought it was just me, but it isn't book in the show notes so that.
Done.
Awesome. And then also Brene Brown did a TED Talk where she talked about the man that approached her and said, what about in men?
Yeah.
And Brene said something to the effect of, I don't study shame in men. And he said something to the effect of, well, that's convenient, which, woke her up to, hey, yeah, I need to probably add that in. And then the findings that she had, because shame is experienced differently between men and women.
That's in this book too. So
Awesome.
She tells that story in this book. She also tells it in that TED Talk.
Okay.
But
so we are done with our Brene Brown hero worship for the day.
Probably not.
Probably not. All right. Brene Brown, I really want on your podcast with my book. If you hear this, please, 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 if somebody knows Brene, send her the video or the sound clip of me begging. No, seriously, Brene Brown's work has changed the behavioral health field for the better, for sure.
Yeah.
So I am definitely, Brene Brown is hero worship for
Changed my life.
Sarah. Absolutely. All righty. So now that we have an understanding of these, a basic understanding of these 4 hormones, I think it's important to say these are in a delicate balance that is constantly going on in our brain. Like if your serotonin levels are off, you're going to have a hard time sleeping. If your dopamine levels are off, you're going to feel really depressed. You're going to also, like, too much, too little can cause hallucinations. I believe, and this is my understanding, don't take this to the bank, is that when there's issues with your dopamine, that's one of the primary causes, or people with schizophrenia have dopamine issues because they're very flat. That flat affect and those hallucinations and whatnot come because your dopamine levels are out of whack.
Hey, just to add just a little bit more science to that, when you have, so we're filled with receptors, we're filled with neurons that are coursing through our body, and most of these are released through neurons. So what happens is you have the head of the neuron, and then the tail of another neuron connects to that one, and it's releasing all of these things, like serotonin, like dopamine.
Sorry.
I'm not sure why that's funny.
I'll
but
explain.
Anyway.
My brain is in the gutter. So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Say, for instance, serotonin, it releases it from the tail, and then that goes to the other neuron to then stimulate some sort of response, whatever that response may be.
Question for clarification, because I'm curious, and now my brain, like I said, is in the gutter. Okay, Sarah's brain is going to sexual innuendos, so if you want to know what I'm laughing about, just go there. I'm not going to explain it.
That's probably good.
Is it that the receptors are coming out the tail and into the head of the neuron, or out the head of the neuron into the tail? Or both?
They're coming from the end of the neuron.
So the tail of the neuron.
The tail of the neuron, they're getting released into what is this interspace between the two. And then they're binding to the head of the neuron and then causing some sort of response. You're a dork.
I would never have made it through medical school because
apparently not.
My brain is just I'm
the point is
I'm scatological, right?
You talked
scatological.
about the balance. The point is that as soon as that happens, as soon as those things are released, other responses happen in that space that actually cause your body to immediately start pulling those things back in, saving those neurons for the next time they need to be released. So your body is constantly regulating. It doesn't just throw it doesn't just throw serotonin, for instance. It doesn't just throw serotonin out for the neuron to get. It also sends out a signal for a return of that serotonin to that neuron so that you're saving all of these things and using them again. So your body is constantly in balance about releasing and pulling things back in.
Awesome. So my scatological brain went places it does not need to go right now. But yes, I would like to say this is the delicate dance of our biology. And I mean, it's just beautiful. Just the fact that it does this to make us alive is just so miraculous.
It's pretty incredible,
to me.
yeah.
It's absolutely amazing to me. So why did I feel like this is needed in order to talk about emotional control? It's because our emotions are highly influenced by our perception of how the world works. And our perception is developed based on our experiences, our environment, and the things that we take in and process on a regular basis. And so recently, I was listening to this link, and Mason, we did not get it ready, but Brad Wilcox was talking about the Book of Mormon, and that the word Mormon is not an actual Greek word, and that there's no Greek characters, but that probably what Joseph Smith meant was for the Book of Mormon to bring more good, but not that he actually meant that Mormon meant more good. You know, what we're seeing there is he's shifting the language in order to give it new meaning, because it used to be a school of thought that Mormon was a literal translation, meaning more good from ancient Greek. People who study Greek are like, no, it doesn't. That's not real. And so now we've got Brad Wilcox on this thing, and we'll connect this show in the show notes if you want to go watch it. It's like a 2.5 minute video clip. It is absolutely hilarious, y'all. I was dying laughing because for me, on the outside of Mormonism, when I understand that he's loading the language or basically changing causation, changing history. So we used to believe that it was this. It was said that that's what it was with certainty. Now that we have more data, we can't change the narrative, but we're going to change the narrative. Like, we can't change the outcome. Mormon meant more good. We can't take that away from Joseph Smith. So let's change all of the history and whitewash it so that way it can mean something else. For those of us on the outside of Mormonism, as we watch this perspective shift, this perception shift from somebody high up in Mormondom that is trusted, because I believe he's in the 70, right?
He's in the
or one of the presidencies, young men's presidencies. Okay,
he
so
might have just been called into the 70. I don't remember, but he was in the young men's presidency.
So he's high up in the leadership, which makes him automatically trustworthy in Mormondom. Remember, in a cult-like system, you don't question your leaders. So we have this person high up who is visibly, like, I can watch this video and say, holy schnackes. He is literally changing your perception. If I'm within that system where I have that childlike trust that my leaders will never leave me astray, as my perception shifts, because what he's saying could make sense, and I'm inside the system, so my cognitive bias wants it to make sense, I get an elevation of emotion, which is a combination of serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin firing, so that I feel happy and calm. My pleasure hormones, or my satisfaction of that answer makes sense. Ding, there's my dopamine, and my connection to my leaders and the empathy that I am trying to excrete in order to understand and connect with my cult-like leaders, in this case, Brad Wilcox, I get something known as elevation emotion. Elevation emotion is a physiological sensation of warmth, glowing, openness in the chest, connection with something that I perceive as being right or good, morally right or good. And sometimes I'm going to get some tingling of the skin. Now, Sarah Westbrook, when she experiences elevation emotion, she does not get the tingling of the skin because that feels like shivers, and I fucking hate that. Mason loves his shivers. He's like, "Ooh yeah, give me some shivers. It's almost as good as an orgasm."
Just give all my secrets away.
Right. So Mason loves that shivery feeling. So for Mason, shivers would confirm this as elevated emotion, which we then interpret as this is the right thing. Okay.
Right. Or we're taught to connect it to something else.
Right.
I have just a quick little quote that's an
Go for
example
it.
of that. This is from The Friend. It's from Luna's book. It's in chapter Emotion Over Intellect, so page 261.
Okay, hang on. Let
but
me
it
get
was
there.
initially from The Friend. Living Prophets Teach Me to Choose the Right, March 2002. But what it says is Christina.
How many paragraphs down?
It's the second paragraph.
Oh, I see it right in the middle of the second paragraph on page
Christina
261.
watched President Thomas S. Monson on the screen in her stake center during General Conference. He was talking about being kind to others. Christina had a warm feeling as she listened. She knew President Monson was a prophet of God. So what's happening here is she has this warm feeling because President Nelson is talking about being kind. Well, if that's the kind of person you want to be, it makes sense that you would have elevated emotions because you want to be kind. And so hearing about experiences or someone teaching you to be kind is a positive thing for you. But what happens is Mormonism teaches you to connect that warm feeling that you felt because he's talking about kindness to mean that must mean he's a prophet of God.
Right.
Which, of course, is not an appropriate connection to make. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is or is not a prophet. It's simply not the connection that it's not what's going on inside your body. It's a connection you've been taught to create
because
so
of
that
what's
you will
going
believe
on.
these things.
Right.
Yes.
So, right.
It's it's understanding that you're going to feel that powerful emotion and helping you to connect it to something that is unrelated to make it related.
Right. Well, and so one of the things I'll use an example from our life. I remember when we were in El Paso, you were almost done with the AECP program. So for those of you who are familiar with Army lingo, AECP program is basically the green to gold program specific to nurses. Mace, what does it stand for?
The AMED, which is the
Army Medicine.
Medical Department. AMED enlisted to commissioning program. So it's to take an enlisted member and make them an officer specific as a nurse.
Right. So for Mason, he went from his LPN to his BSN while in the military through the AECP program. So we were getting ready to move. And it was the first time that the military would actually consider where we wanted to go. Perks of being an officer. Let me just say that. Also, basic training for officers. Squirrel. Basic training for officers is not real basic training.
Well,
I'm just going to say that.
Medical officers, it's a little different.
Okay.
So it's not just officers in general.
And, officers versus enlisted basic training, I'm sure, is vastly different. But so anyway, Mason, you were going through that program. And as we were looking for places to live, I remember being fed up with the desert. Like, I wanted something green. And so as we started looking at real estate sites, we got into Fort Bragg, which is North Carolina.
Right.
And we opened it up and we were looking at the real estate market. And what I see is a house that would fit our family in our price range. So you look, like other options could have been like Fort Carson in Colorado. But when we get there, the prices are way too expensive. We're looking at maybe Washington State back up to Fort...
Lewis.
No, Lewis.
Fort Lewis.
Thank you. Fort Lewis, Madigan. There it is. Madigan Army Medical Center is one of the things. And I've got the green, but I'm looking at these prices of houses because we want to buy a house and we can't afford it. So when we get to the North Carolina one, I get the green and the price point. And guess what I felt?
Oh, you felt a warm,
glowing,
positive feeling.
Openness in the chest. And I interpreted that as Jesus wants us to go to North Carolina.
Right.
Not, hey, look, I'm getting the green environment with 4 seasons, although winter is pretty short in North Carolina. So I get my 4 seasons and it's within a price range that our family can afford. I did not interpret that as meaning, hey, this has the things that we want. Because of my Mormon upbringing, I got that happy, calm feeling, that connection to the place, that pleasure of, hey, we can make this work. Let's go to Fort Bragg. I took that to mean Jesus wants me in Fort Bragg. Now, having said that, for all my peeps in North Carolina is the first place that I ever felt truly at home. And it is a place that I continue to miss. My closest friends of all time are either the handful of friends from
El Paso,
like my Army career. I had a couple in El Paso. High school, a couple of friends from high school. But in North Carolina, I found my adult feet. And I grew there in ways that have impacted me for good. I mean, I love it. I have so many happy memories.
Yeah.
And the only reason we didn't go back to North Carolina after Texas, the reason we're in Missouri, is because the special education programs in the area were total shit. And we had 3 special needs kids. So we decided to give another state a try because just the education system at the elementary school level was not good. But I love North Carolina. So maybe Jesus did send me there. But
well, then I want to
my
kind of
point
add
being
to
that connection.
That doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of higher being out there trying to tell you where they want you to go or anything. It's just recognizing that the process that's going on inside of your body is interpreted and extrapolated by other organizations that want you to make it into something that it isn't necessarily. And so recognizing that that process is going on can help you to then decide,
right,
what do I do with this? If you still want to interpret that as the Spirit, there's fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But you need to understand that there's other things going on, or that that's just a natural process inside your body. And what do I do with it?
Well, and I think the challenge here is if I go straight to that's where Jesus wants me, I'm most likely going to ignore other things.
Yes.
That could potentially get in the way, right, of making the best decision for me. Like once it was like, that's where Jesus wants me, I was balls to the wall. We are buying a house there, even though as we were looking for a house, and that house ended up being that house, we lost over $150,000 in that house because of problems. I don't think that's what Jesus wanted for me, but it didn't matter. Now, I love that house because one of my best friends in the whole world ended up being my next door neighbor, 2 doors down the street. Absolutely love the woman. Will love her till the day that I die. So again, it's that interpretation. Rather than making a decision in rational, logical, reasoning brain space, I made it in the spiritual bypass place of, I got spiritual confirmation. It was my burning bush. Jesus wants me in North Carolina. It does not matter what else happens. That is where I need to be, which is exactly what emotional control does. It's when we have our perceptions shifted out of reality-based and logical reasoning-based places, and we spiritually bypass, in this case, we're talking about a religious trauma thing, so that spiritual bypassing, which influences me making decisions based on feeling rather than logic, it becomes dangerous.
Right.
And so as we move forward today and Mason begins to share his story, I want our listeners to focus on how the perception changes influences that emotional experience. Because what we talked about last week was how the thought control, if I can shift the way you think about things or the way you perceive life, then I have power to change your emotions. And if I get back on this freedom of mind worksheet under emotional control, some of the things that happens with emotional control is that we are utilizing emotion stopping techniques to block feelings that are uncomfortable, such as homesickness and anger. Make the person feel that the problems are always their own fault. It's never the leader's fault of the group. You're misinterpreting that. Therefore, your feeling about it, your concern is wrong because they're a prophet of God. Promote feelings of guilt or unworthiness, such as identified guilt. You're not living up to your potential. Your family is deficit. Your past is suspect. Your affiliations are unwise. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions are irrelevant or selfish. Social guilt, historical guilt. We're going to instill feelings of fear. So thinking independently. So instill fear of things such as be afraid of thinking independently, be afraid of the outside world, view people as your enemies when they're not, losing one's salvation, leaving or being shunned by the group, other people's disapproval, extreme emotions of highs and lows, love bombing and praise one moment and then declaring you're a horrible sinner the next moment. This is why I said many moons ago, I think it was episode 17, that Mormons breed personality disorders. It's because of these high highs and low lows, and you're saved 1 minute and damned the next. It becomes that habit that leads to the development of personality disorders. For more information,
we don't want you to be comfortable.
Right. For more information on personality disorders, go buy my damn book. Things are often ritualistic, sometimes public confession of sins, or in Mormonism, private confession of sins. Phobia indoctrination, meaning that you have irrational fears about leaving the group, no happiness outside of the group. So like basically this is that Mormonism, you can't be happy without Mormonism. If you leave, you're going to hell. There's going to be demon possession, incurable diseases, the accidents you're having, the suicidal ideation that's going on, the insanity. It's all because you left the group. Shunning those who leave, fear of being rejected, never a legitimate reason to leave the group, okay? These are things that we're seeing in Mormonism and other toxic religions in the sense of it's never okay. There's no legitimate reason to walk away from the church, no matter what. If you're leaving, it's because you're weak or deceived, you're undisciplined, you sinned, you've been brainwashed by a family or a counselor. Like Mason, that conversation you had with your uncle the other day, he said that I had been reprogrammed by my university education, and that's why I'm like all in love with psychology, which is basically a stupid field of study, according to your uncle. So it's like that discrediting of the area that I've dedicated my life to, and whatnot. Like he was shocked that we had evidence-based treatments for the behavioral health field based on objective science. And yes, he is right. That has not always been the case for my field, but over the last 20 to 30 years, that has been the case for my field. We've got a lot of evidence-based things now, or threats of harm to ex-family members or ex-members and to their family. So that's that Stephen Hassan quick view of emotional control.
That was fast, yeah.
Yep, fast and furious. And I can throw this whole sheet away now that I've utilized it.
You just don't care about it anymore now?
I don't care about it anymore. I'm so tired of looking at this freedom of mind sheet. No, seriously. So before Mason shares his story and we move into the next part, plug in Go Buy Yourself Recovering Agency by Lindsey Corbden. Mason and I have barely scratched the surface of this book with all of these episodes. We've barely scratched the surface. It is a great resource and reference material. Please support the work of Lindsey Corbden. Again, that book is Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control. A link to buy this book is in the show notes. Okay, we make it easy. It's available on Amazon. I prefer the paperback version of this book because I can mark it up and write in the margins.
Right.
You can tell that my book is well loved. Yes, but it is a Kindle. You can get it in Kindle and in Audible. And the author that reads it in Audible, it's a male voice actor, voice person. He does a phenomenal job. I very much enjoyed listening to this. I actually consumed this book first by Audible because I was driving, and then I later got the hardback copy. And I love the flow charts. One of the things I love about this book is they've got some great flow charts and whatnot in here. It's just an excellent resource to have. And then the other worksheet is you can find it freedomofmind.com, and it is the worksheet Undoing Undue Influence in the Bite Model. All right, Mason, your turn.
That was a mouthful.
Tell your story.
You need to take a couple of breaths or something. So before I tell my story, I want to, because we talked about this.
Well, and we're shifting into examples of loading the language to get to emotional control. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Yeah, we're just going to talk about that. So we talked about elevated emotion, and there was a definition just on Wikipedia that I wanted to share. But I also wanted to share there are notes here to where this comes from. This definition comes from two different journals. One is the Journal of Positive Psychology, and the other is the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. So they come from reputable sources. But what it says is elevation is an emotion elicited by witnessing actual or imagined virtuous acts of remarkable moral goodness. What really struck me is that it's actual or imagined. So if an organization is telling a story to elicit that emotional response, then it may not matter to you whether it's true or not true. You get the emotional response because your body triggers as if it was real. And when you find out later that the story is not real, you have a couple different courses of action that you can take there. But just recognizing the elevated emotion can come whether the story is true or not.
Well, and it's important also to identify this is the sole purpose of marketing. Mm-hmm. When you are in marketing, you're trying to get your viewers to feel something about the product or whatever it is that you're trying to sell. You also do this with music. Music is commonly like a common quote is music is what our feelings sound like. So
Right.
you can elicit this. I mean, this is what advertisers are doing.
Yeah.
In order to get you to buy their product. This is like when you watch those little Mormon messages and those little videos, those are like, they've been studied to utilize music and to put it all together in such a way that you have an emotional experience. And because of what you're taught, either in the ad or by your leaders or in your environment, is going to impact you differently. Like for me on the outside, now when I watch the little Mormon stories where Jeffrey R. Holland breaks down on the side of the road and he goes and he searches for his family, that used to be a super powerful, like, don't give up, endure to the end for me. And now when I saw it recently again, and I don't remember where I saw it recently, but I saw it recently again, and my thought was, I wonder if that story is even true. So because my environment has shifted and because I know that Jeffrey R. Holland has been dishonest in general conference, I question his integrity and his credibility on everything. But an active member, they're going to look at that and be like, what an inspiring story.
Right.
So, like I'm not influenced by Bud Light commercials at all. Because I can't drink bubbles and I think beer tastes nasty. I'm a hard liquor girl. Like, give me my fruity little cocktails. That's what I love. Or an old fashioned. Oh, yummy. But anyway, okay, squirrel. But my point being that I'm not as influenced by Bud Light because I don't like beer. But I've got lots of friends, like one of my friends that I went on vacation with recently loves Corona. And, we're together. She watches a Corona video and she's like, oh, I love that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care.
So it's interesting you brought up, music is the way that you feel your emotions. It cued to me this idea.
Music is what feelings sound like.
Okay. Thank you. It brought to mind this thing that even kids in my generation, but a lot of kids nowadays, they'll be like, well, I don't listen to the words. I just listen to the beat. And that really resonates with me in a lot of ways. That's kind of what these religious organizations are doing. We want you to feel it. We don't want you to think about it. We don't want you to really hear what we're saying. We just want you to feel the power of it. Feel how it makes you recognize how it makes you feel inside and all this stuff. When you take the time to look at the words, you're like, whoa, I don't want to be a part of that at all. So this definition goes on. It is experienced as a distinct feeling of warmth and expansion that is accompanied by appreciation and affection for the individual whose exceptional conduct is being observed. Elevation motivates those who experience it to open up to, affiliate with, and assist others. Elevation makes an individual feel lifted up and optimistic about humanity. All those things get used by marketing, religious organizations, and again, recognize that it's going on.
Well, because it's not a bad thing. Remember, this is
right. We're not trying to tag it good or bad.
Ethics.
Right.
How is it being utilized? How are you utilizing it? How are you being impacted by it?
Right. Right. Okay, so what the conversation with my dad, conversation with my dad really is just a small piece of this that's coming on, is that we started to talk about abuse.
I mean, you and your dad.
Me and my dad.
Right, you guys were having a phone call and...
Right, we started to talk about abuse, and I don't remember how we got on the conversation, but we started to talk about abuse and our experiences. I some of the experiences I had with him, certainly with him and my mother. And then he shared some experiences about him and his parents too, which I will not share here because that's not my place. But we kind of quibbled about what the definition of abuse is. Even with a Webster's dictionary definition of abuse, we kind of quibbled over it. And he talked about some of the experiences he had. And I said, well, what would you call those if you're not calling them abuse? And he said, well, I would call them inappropriate. And
I think it's important to say that the things that were being described were like acts of aggression, acts of physical assault, acts of that would be a legal definition.
Right.
And I'm not saying who did them and who didn't do them. Like, that's not my place.
Right.
An act of entrapment, holding somebody in a certain room they can't get out to escape uncomfortable situations. So what we're talking about in the legal world would absolutely be abusive.
Right.
Like, we're not talking about, it was a little inappropriate because I just yelled at somebody. We're talking about physical aggression, assault, holding somebody in a place against their will.
In my opinion, if this had gone to a court of law, it would have been defined as abusive.
And it would have been prosecuted.
Well, and that depends a lot on evidence and things like that. But I think that it would have been defined as abusive. My dad didn't want to call it that, and he has his own reasons. But ultimately, it came down to what I felt like what was happening is we could not have an emotional connection over our experiences because we were quibbling about the words. And I really feel like in a lot of ways, that's what loading the language does, is it either prevents you from having an emotional experience or controls what kind of experience you're having so that you don't have to focus on the words or what else it means. And so there was a real struggle for my dad and I to connect on this issue because we couldn't agree on what the word itself meant. And that was really difficult. And that's kind of what's going on with loading the language, is that if you make something mean something that it doesn't mean to most of the world or to an outside organization, it can be difficult to then relate on that level.
Right. Well, and you and your dad ended up screaming at each other because you didn't feel like he was getting it, and he was not willing to back down on his refusal to use the word abuse.
Well, and to be fair, he did a little bit towards the end. I don't know how genuine it was, but he was making efforts. I don't feel like in this case my dad was just being belligerent. I really don't. From the outside, it might have seemed that way, but I don't feel like that's what was going on. We actually made some progress in that conversation, but it was really, really difficult because if I've got to spend 10 minutes arguing with you about what abuse means, instead of saying, look, Dad, I feel like you abused me.
It distracts you from...
Right. I can't spend that 10 minutes saying, hey, Dad, I'm hurting because as a kid, I feel like you abused me, or I feel like you abused my siblings or my mom or whatever. We can't talk about the real issue because I got to spend 10 freaking minutes arguing about the word and explaining that, well, in a court of law, they would call this abuse or blah, blah, blah. We got to argue about that instead of having an emotional connection about lived and painful experiences.
Didn't he say, in a court of law, that's probably the word they would use, but it's not the word I would use? I think he said something
I think he said something like that. But then that always comes up, but the court of law, that's people and blah, 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 right? It's variable and stuff. Okay, fine, I get that. That's not the point. The point is, I'm trying to share with you and connect with you about something that is a part of both of our pasts that we can that we can process or learn to deal with.
Before I read this quote, what was your intent in having that conversation with your dad in the first place? What were you looking for? That's the counselor coming out in me.
Right, that's a good question. And I don't remember. I'm just guessing what my intent would have been at that time. It would be simply to be able to share an experience that was painful for me, so that we could then connect and be able to talk about it and work through the fact that it was a painful experience. And even to be honest, at the end of it, it probably would have only strengthened even my dad's opinion in my eyes, because my dad's changed a lot over the last 20 years.
Oh, absolutely.
He's not physically abusive the way that he is. I feel like there's still a lot.
The way that he used to be.
The way that he used to be. I feel like there's a lot of still some emotional abuse there, but I think it's just ignorance. I think he just doesn't even recognize that that's what he's doing. But I can't talk about the emotional abuse that's going on right now, because he won't even own the physical abuse that happened, 30 years ago. So when the intent would have been simply to be able to connect on that issue and be able to work through it and
because I thought that
build our connection.
I thought that your intent going in was that your dad would give some type of credit for the study that you had done and the information that you had found. Not that he would agree with it, but he would say, yeah, I see how that's concerning. But instead, he spent his time arguing with you. Well, and you both did. You're both guilty. I mean, that conversation went to hell in a handbasket, and both of you communicated in unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm saying that is because you brought that to my attention.
Right.
I'm not
Not
over here being like, well,
I learned
Mason,
a lot about
you and your
myself.
dad.
Yeah, I learned a lot about myself from that conversation.
Right. But one of the things that you had told me, if I think it was that conversation, was that, you knew a little bit more about how I felt when you first started this down the journey of me leaving the church, because all you wanted was not for him to agree, but for him to say, you know what, Mason, it looks like you've done your research, you've done it well, you've looked at what appears to be credible sources. I don't see it that way, but I can understand why you do.
Right.
And that's really, when I talk to people who have left the church, that's really all most of them want. It's not that people are staying in the Mormon church. It's like, hey, we want you to be more informed.
Right.
Are you aware of this stuff? Because the church has, in my opinion, the church has lied to me and hidden it. So this is difficult.
Well, because without an
for me.
awareness of those things, the pain and abuse that we see now will continue to be perpetuated on other people. So it isn't about whether or not you're in or out of the church. I don't care if he's still happy in the church. I think that's great. I don't want to take that away from him or any of my siblings at all. But if you don't recognize that some of the things that you and I are talking about cause pain and real lasting damage to people, then those things are going to continue to happen. They're going to happen to somebody else. And that's the whole point there. And like the whole conversation about abuse was actually just an example to help reinforce the conversation about the church. And it just didn't end up being that way because we fought over the words.
On page 183 in Luna's book, they say each word is an entire package filled with implication, emotion, metaphor, and experience. A high-demand group uses its own complex vocabulary, a mix of invented words and phrases to convey complicated symbolism and doctrines, and existing words which have been redefined either subtly or dramatically. Then the other quote that I really like is on page 185, where Luna ends up quoting Lalich and Tobias, and they say, all humor aside, the effect of loaded words can be powerful. In some cases, and then the quote from Lalich and Tobias, changing the meanings of words produces anxiety and self-doubt. Luna again, for those who leave the group, these words can later trigger a negative emotional response. And then Lalich and Tobias again, sometimes when a former member unexpectedly encounters the cult's language, she or he may dissociate or experience a variety of feelings: confusion, anxiety, terror, guilt, shame, or rage. And that's, that's the issue with, all of these, what is it? Orwell talks in his book, is it 1984, Newspeak? Or what's the other word I'm looking for? There's another word I'm looking for that I can't think of right now. Double speak, where you're shifting the meaning of things in order to get a certain response or a certain outcome. I think that, in my opinion, one of the reasons your dad had a hard time utilizing or naming what was going on in the situation you guys were talking about as abusive was because the implications of that word, the shame that goes along with that word is really, really difficult to talk about. And yet we've learned through, Brene Brown, who I swore I wouldn't bring up again, but we've learned through Brene's work that calling it what it actually is, as defined by the language you are speaking. So the word abuse in Spanish doesn't mean the same thing. I'm sure they have their own word to describe that same thing. But in the English language, the accepted definition of the word abuse is such so that your communication is clear and concise and connective and communicative and understanding. That's why we have a dictionary, is so that we all understand, and yes, every culture has its own little subset of vocabulary words, but they're, understood by basically everybody else in that culture who speaks that same language.
Right. Or the dictionary exists so that when you don't agree, you can go to it and say, okay, yeah, I misunderstood that word. Let me just kind of change that. So, yeah.
Right.
It's about unification in language.
Right. And by shifting that so that you get a different outcome or to avoid certain uncomfortable feelings is very harmful. Whereas if I use the word, if I call it what it is, if I'm able to say, you know what, yeah, this was abusive, it was wrong, it was harmful, and I've come a long way since then, and I'm really sorry for how my poor actions and behavior impacted you and the people around you. That does so much more for healing the emotional wounds and influencing positive change within the relationship for multiple generations. Like if you and your dad could have gotten to a place of understanding and connection of, you messed up, please take accountability. Like loading the language shifts accountability away from the person that is loading the language.
Yeah.
And it stops curiosity and thought patterns. Because like you said, Mason, you're then arguing about a definition rather than the pain associated with what you were describing.
Right. Well, and to be frank, if my dad had just accepted the fact that that's what had happened, if we weren't arguing about the fact that this was or was not abuse, if he had just accepted that those things happened, that it had a strong and negative impact upon his family members, I'd have said, you know what, Dad, I really appreciate that. Thanks for recognizing that. I'm not trying to go back. I know you can't change that, but you can connect with me now by recognizing that what happened was painful to me. Whether or not you saw it the same way isn't really all that important. To me, that was my experience. And if you can acknowledge and recognize that your actions did affect that in a negative way, then we connect and have a positive outcome rather than disconnect and argue about words and experiences because you don't see it the same way that I do. I don't need you to see it the same way that I do. I need you to recognize that the way I see it was painful, that it hurt, and that it affected my life. The same thing with some of the trauma that you talk about in your book. It's not that everybody else needs to see it the way that you see it. It's that everybody else needs to recognize, or everybody else will benefit by recognizing the way you saw it had a powerful impact on your life and decisions that you made from that point on. I don't need you to see it the same way. I need you to recognize the way that I see it and how that impacted me.
Well, and as they recognize the way I see it, my reader is then able to say, hey, this is what happened to me, and this is my experience here. And, oh, look at these commonalities. I'm not alone. It's normal to feel this way when this is your experience. What can I do? Like, that's what my book is meant to do, is to help. Like, I don't pull any punches. I am very descriptive in the things that happened and how that made me feel and how it made me a really, ugly person, how dysfunctional I got because of that. But my goal is let me show you that you can talk about where you fucked up yourself, and how talking about it and acknowledging it and taking accountability for it is healing, because what you're describing from your dad is so normal. That's that self-protective of, that's in the past, I can't change it, so
Right.
why even talk about it? And the reason is because as you talk about it, as you acknowledge where you're struggling with empathy and you're struggling with being able to be vulnerable with people, it heals wounds, and it creates that empathy together so that you get that drop of oxytocin, which makes the relationship stronger.
Yeah.
I mean, everything in the data, all the evidence-based treatments, when it comes to family counseling or couples counseling, the only way it's going to work is if all parties involved can practice empathy. And when I talk about empathy, I mean the ability to perceive the experience from somebody else's perspective. And as you can do that and connect with it and stay present with that view rather than inserting your own opinions, if you can put your opinions on the back burner, turn them off for a little bit, and connect with the person who is, so in Gottman, they call it the speaker's role and the listener role. If the person that's speaking, so in this case, Mason, I'm speaking, if you can see things from my perspective and connect with me emotionally from my worldview and understand it, and then I feel understood by you, I heal. The
Right.
person who has the potential to heal the relationship is the person in the listening role.
Right.
And that's what I tell all my clients. And as soon as my clients get that empathy piece, all the other communication things, all the other interventions just start to fall into place. And I've seen this over and over and over again. So I've been in clinical practice since 2012. So in 2012, I was in clinical practice under supervision. And then in 2014, I graduated with my master's degree and practiced more on my own I still had my postgraduate supervision, but it was a lot less intense than when I was doing my graduate supervision hours. And so since 2012, so I'm looking at now over or about 11 years of experience in my field. And the best predictor of family counseling success and marital counseling success is the parties or the client's ability to practice empathy from a genuine place.
Absolutely. You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about like the 5 steps of repentance that we were taught growing up in the church. And I was thinking, I don't know that they really address that, but I feel like they do. And let me just read them. The first one, we must recognize our sins. To repent, we must admit to ourselves that we have sinned. So the first thing is you have to recognize that what you did wasn't appropriate or in line with, in this case, either what God wants or what you want for yourself. But then one of the steps, the 4th step, as we were taught growing up, is we must make restitution. And I think the church likes to attach to that some sort of financial restitution or whatever.
Right.
But in reality,
you can't take the sacrament for a year. That's your restitution. Is no, you can't eat the one piece of bread and drink the little shot glass of water on Sundays.
Which you're snarky about. It's important.
Snarky.
It's important to some people, but it doesn't address real restitution. If I want to really apologize and repent for something that I did to you, for instance, I have to be able to understand what it meant to you.
How I experienced
How you
it.
experienced, what it meant to you that I did that. I have to understand that if I really want to make restitution, because otherwise I'm just doing what I think is best, and it may or may not meet your needs in that situation.
I think when we look at confession as a healing tool, because we know that confession is very healing. And again, Brene Brown talks about this.
Right.
But the person you're confessing to, you have to have complete trust in, and they have to honor confidentiality.
Right.
But to heal relationships, You have to acknowledge what you did to the person you harmed.
Right.
If I'm like, look, Mason, yeah, sure, I punched you in the throat, but you just need to get over it. I can't take the punch back. No matter what I do,
Right.
I can't take away
It's
the
in
fact
the
that
past.
that
Why are we even
hurt
talking
you.
about it?
Right. I have to be like, yeah, I got out of hand. I lost control and I punched you in the throat. I'm sorry. That's out of character for me. And it's something that I feel ashamed of. And I apologize. That's not what I wanted to do. As soon as I start actually admitting to the things that I did, now we can heal. If I'm expecting forgiveness and healing without taking accountability in front of the person I harmed, it doesn't work.
Right.
Time for a commercial break. We'll be right back.
Well, and real accountability comes with a real understanding of what it meant. It can't just be, yeah, I get it. I'm sorry that happened, right? It has to be, I understand. Well, what's ironic to me is the very next step is don't do it again. Well, frankly, if you want to not do something again, one of the most powerful ways to do that is for you to understand why it hurt the people that it hurt. Because frankly, I don't want to hurt you. You're my spouse. I love you. I want us to have a positive relationship. If I can understand how what I did hurt you, I'm much more likely to avoid it in the future.
So I agree with you 100%. In sexual perpetrator rehab therapy, one of the primary goals that the therapist has is to have the perpetrator connect with the harm that they caused the victim. Now, in those situations, the perpetrator does not get access to the victim to apologize. Right. That is, no. That's not how that goes.
It has its limitations, but the understanding does not. If you can understand, that does not have its limitations.
But one of the primary things that we utilize is empathy training in order to prevent it. And I mean, go if you want to know my feeling on rehabbing true sexual predators, go listen to my podcast from last November about this, maybe it was last October, the 7 years of sex abuse cover-up story. I say some things in there that are more influential.
Well, and if you think about Jesus Christ, one of the reasons that we feel Jesus Christ understands us, both in Mormonism and in Christianity, is because somehow, through the atonement, he was able to suffer and feel everything that we have suffered. That is about building true and complete empathy. Whether or not you believe that happens, that is what is being taught, is that Jesus has true and complete empathy for us because he has felt everything that we've felt. He's gone through what we've gone through. That's understanding. That's understanding where I am, which allows him to have the empathy that Christianity claims that he has.
Right. Well, and that's how I always interpreted it. But that's not how most of Christianity interpreted it. Like the idea that Jesus has perfect empathy for us because of his garden thing was always a beautiful doctrine to me. But I don't think Jesus actually needed to be in the garden. Like the whole idea that a father would harm his son.
Right. Different conversation purpose. For sure.
Yeah. Now I'm getting all squirrely over here of, I really like Wendy Wilcox Jensen recently posted in her group, the Empowered Former LDS, posted something along the lines of, I don't believe in Jesus the way I used to. He's no longer my leader, but my teacher. I look to the figure of Jesus in the Bible to instruct the way that I treat other people, but no longer as a man that had to come here, that had to be harmed in order for me to succeed, because that's really toxic.
Right.
But the idea that what he did is the ideal way to love humans in a godlike manner, that part she can get behind. And I thought her post was absolutely beautiful and brilliant. And I love Wendy. She is very thoughtful in what she puts out.
So anything else we need to discuss for emotional
I don't think
control?
so for the loading of the language piece, but I wanted to talk about how loading the language and controlling one's emotional response does something that Luna Lindsey talks about as dispensing of existence. And so, again, I'm going to read this right out of Luna's book. They are quoting Hassan in his book, Releasing the Bonds. And I'm going to just like kind of break this up. So if you're following along, this is on page 166 in Luna's book, Dispensing of Existence. It is the second paragraph under, but I'm going to skip some of it that, I just kind of want to condense it a little bit here. So please feel free to go in the book and look this up. Again, page 166. Put simply, dispensing of existence is the belief that people in the group have the right to exist and all let me do this again. Put simply, dispensing of existence is the belief that people in the group have the right to exist and all ex-members and critics or dissidents do not. Totalist groups require various forms of pressure to keep members in line. If you could just sleep in on Sunday with no consequences, the pews wouldn't be so full. Thus enters the grandest incentive, threat of death. This threat can be literal, but it doesn't always have to be literal. So that's where I'm skipping a couple of lines here. Most religious cults threaten either permanent soul death or infinite punishment. Other forms of existence can be imperiled as well. Loss of self, purpose, identity, community, or ideals are all frightening forms of figurative death. Many reason that the significance of this life is nothing compared to the next, and that some ideals are worth dying for. And I would add, some ideals are worth treating people like shit for.
Yeah.
And then I absolutely love on page 172, Luna quotes, oh goodness, I just forgot her name. Not Shannon Tanner.
Susan. Tanner?
Beck. No. What is
Martha
her
Beck.
first name? Martha Beck. Thank you. I read the book, Leaving the Saints. It's a phenomenal book. This quote can be found on page 240. I'm quoting it from Luna's quoting of it. And this is something, Mason, you and I have experienced with your family, is for a pioneer people accustomed to a level of interdependency rare in the United States, excommunication was a horrifying prospect. It was similar to the penalty of, is that Maru Hajibu?
Mura Hachibu, I think is how you say it, but I don't know
how
for
to
sure.
say that word. Sorry. I apologize. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's an Asian word from Japan. I don't know how to pronounce it. This is where I need RFM to correct me and explain it to me.
Right.
So it was similar to the penalty of Maru Hachibu, expulsion from the village in feudal Japan, where many people found suicide preferable to living as exiles. The accused heretics had broken none of the church's commandments except for the unspoken 11th, thou shalt not commit publicity. Their real crime was excessive knowledge, having it and communicating it. And I feel like that's what's going on to a lot of us who are speaking out in this post-Mormon or ex-Mormon or post-religion, organized religion space, is as we speak out, we get punished for having a different knowledge or a different opinion and publicizing that we have a different opinion. Like Mason, your brother told you the other day that you're basically declaring war on the church. And the reason that I feel loaded language and dispensing of existence are so intertwined is the example of, if you call me an apostate, those people within the community are trained to dehumanize me. I'm noted as dangerous, untrustworthy, misled, deceived, evil. And what ends up happening is, instead of people wanting to engage with different information or difference of opinion, even when that difference of information may be historically and objectively factual, they're not willing to engage in it because the person that is talking about it is an apostate. But then you're caught in that double bind of anybody who talks about it is considered an apostate because the truth is anti fill in the blank, in our case anti-Mormon, but it could be anti-Scientology, anti-Jehovah's Witness, anti whatever goes against the group think of the cult.
And you can't talk about it because, and we've both had this happen. Well, the one thing I know is that I know that this church is true, right? You're talking about this emotional experience. Let me read something. This is from Boyd K. Packer. And again, from Luna's book on page 257. There is no such thing as an accurate, objective history of the church without consideration of the spiritual powers that attend this work. There is no such thing as a scholarly, objective study of the office of bishop without consideration of spiritual guidance, of discernment, and of revelation. That is not scholarship. Accordingly, I repeat, there is no such thing as an accurate or objective history of the church which ignores the Spirit. In other words, you cannot separate the way that you feel about the church from the scholarly look that you might give the church.
Right.
And that's just, again, it's I only listen to it for the beat. I can't pay attention to the words. If I pay attention to the words, I might not want to listen to this anymore. I feel like there's a lot of that going on in Mormonism. It's like, it makes me feel good. I can't pay attention to the other stuff because, heaven forbid, I don't feel good from this organization. Right. Or the organization has taught you can't feel good, you can't be happy anywhere else. Right. So I don't want to do anything that might jeopardize my happiness because this is the only place I can get it.
Right, absolutely. I really like to look at emotions, and what I teach my clients is that our emotions are data. It's information that we utilize to help us navigate our lives and our world, but they're not necessarily truth. It might be truth that when I get kicked in the shins, I feel angry, but my anger doesn't automatically mean that the person that kicked me in the shins hates me, even though I might feel like they do.
Right.
So one of the things that I love, the part of what to do about it, I'm going to just repeat what we've said several times is remain curious, take some time to get through the emotion, and then analyze it later when you've got a clear head and you're in your frontal cortex brain space. But one of the things that I love is on page 260, and this is why I'm like, hey, I'll buy this book, because this flow chart that Lindsey created is absolutely brilliant. And it's cute. So it's like an easy, cute little thing to follow. Like, it's very crafty. I like it. And what Luna does is they have written and created this flowchart, how to know truth the LDS way. And we start with learn of the gospel or a principle. For example, tithing, word of wisdom, or read the Book of Mormon. Then our next step is ponder whether the Lord's word is true. Then our next step is ask God with a sincere heart, real intent, and faith in Christ if it is true. So our steps are learn about the gospel, think about the gospel, ask God with sincerity if it's true. Then we get to the next box is, did you receive an answer from the Spirit? ? If the answer is no, I did not get an answer from the Spirit, then you get to stop. You've done something wrong. Then you get to the box, start over with more faith, sincerity, and intent, and less sin, doubt, and selfishness. Then you go back up to the starting point, learn of the gospel or a principle, for example, tithing, word of wisdom, or read the Book of Mormon. So if you get to the box, did you receive the answer from the Spirit? If your answer is yes, then your next question is the principle or gospel true? If your answer is no, then you get the box, stop. The answer wasn't of God. Start over with more faith, sincerity, and intent, and less sin, doubt, and selfishness. However, if your answer is yes, I did get an answer from the Spirit of God, then your box is yes, congratulations, you have a testimony. Commit and abide by it forever. Okay, so a little bit snarky there, but I feel like this is absolutely that circular reasoning of, it doesn't matter what the information is. If it goes against what the church has taught me, it's obviously anti-false, evil, and stay away from it. And you cannot do that if you actually want objective truth. So then the next flow chart is how to know truth through reason. And I love this because of the curiosity. So again, this is page 260. All right. This starts with, there's no shame. Let's see, it starts with, there's not really a real start spot, which is something I love. Observe the way the world is and devise an explanation or consider someone else's explanation. Then collect more data. Does the explanation fit all of the evidence? If the answer is no, stop. The explanation is unlikely to be true. Next step, there's no shame in being wrong. You've eliminated an unlikely explanation and are closer to the truth. Collect data. Observe the way the world is and devise an explanation or consider someone else's explanation. Collect more data. Does the explanation fit all the evidence? If your answer is yes, then the question is it the simplest of all explanations? Which is Occam's razor.
Occam's razor.
Sorry, thank you. Occam's razor. I knew I said it wrong as soon as it came out. I was like, that's not right. Occam's razor. If the answer is no, stop. The explanation is less likely to be true. There's no shame in being wrong. You've eliminated the unlikely explanation and are closer to the truth. Collect more data. Observe. So it's this thing of get curious, collect data, and hold off on making your assumption that something is true until you've reasoned it out. So if the answer is yes, I've collected more data, it is the simplest of all explanations. Yes, is it falsifiable? Meaning, can you demonstrate that it's wrong? If the answer is no, stop. Maybe it's true, but there's no way to know for sure. That's okay. Some things may be unknowable, but claiming to know is a lie. Is it falsifiable? Yes, takes you to congratulations. This explanation is likely to be true, but maybe not, so keep thinking. And this is really where, in Mormonism, they use this behavioral thought and emotional control in order to get their members to be certain of a truth that there's no way
verifiable.
You can verify it. And it's that you feel really secure when you know, because guess what? The brain likes to know stuff. So the best way to avoid emotional control is to be comfortable with not knowing. And that takes practice. You have to feel that discomfort in order for that discomfort to not feel like a threat.
Yeah, well, and right down to the bottom of this thing, it says, notice how reason allows that all proposed explanations may be wrong. All of the explanations may be wrong. If you start out with the objective that this is true, now I need to verify it, you've already started down the wrong path.
Right, you're in a trap of bias.
Right.
And everybody
you're in circular
has
reasoning.
bias.
You're in a situation where you're not going to get an objective look, a truly honest objective look at whatever it is that you're looking at.
Right. Well, and again, I would like to challenge our listeners, don't think in right or wrong, truth or untruth, good or bad. Like, cognitive bias is not a bad thing. I have cognitive bias.
Sure.
You have cognitive bias.
Right.
We all have it. If I understand that when I'm looking at the data, that I might be looking at it from a place of bias, now I have the ability to continue to be curious and collect data in order to become less biased. That's why peer-reviewed articles are so important. Like, I submitted my book to a colleague, and her response to me was, I don't view trauma bonds from the clinical perspective that you do. So I think that you need to explore this a little bit more. Once I got over my I'm not wrong initial response, that protective response of no, I'm right and you're wrong, and my understanding of this is factual and yours obviously isn't, which is normal. I got past that within a couple of hours. I consulted with somebody else and we talked about the nuance, because frankly, trauma bonds are still very new in the research. Really, what we know as factual, which is, again, most likely true, is that trauma changes the way you interact with people, and that attachment trauma creates really unhealthy relationship patterns later in life. I call that trauma bonding, that I am bound to somebody in an unhealthy pattern because of trauma. But that's not how all researchers look at it. And that as we gain more data and we shift our vernacular, maybe mine will be more accurate and maybe it will lean the other way where it's only descriptive of a very certain type of trauma. Who knows?
Right. Well, and you're talking about trauma bonds as they persist throughout life. Like, we see trauma bonds in Hollywood all the time, like on a movies. How many times have you seen an action movie or a disaster movie where the guy and the girl end up together at the end because they fought together to try and get through whatever the problem was? That's a trauma bond. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or good or healthy or unhealthy, but recognizing that that is what it is can be helpful for you as you try and decide where to go from here.
Absolutely. And so that's the point with this emotional control piece is utilize the way you feel about something as data, but it's not the only piece of data.
Right.
Get curious.
Right.
Stay in your logical, rational brain space and identify your own biases.
Our perspective isn't the only perspective, but it is a perspective and can be a very important perspective as you try to sort through some of this stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it's not about this is the only thing or
Right.
not the black and white stuff.
Right. Organizations, advertisers, they want you to feel good about things so that you remain a customer.
Right.
They don't want you to consume the data like the uncomfortable historical stuff or the evidence that President Nelson and Holland and other apostles have flat out lied from the pulpit. They don't want you to have that information because it doesn't feel good. And when things stop feeling good, people no longer consume whatever they're trying to sell. So keep an eye on that. If something about the church is making you feel icky, explore it. Collect data from multiple sources. Reason it out. Check your sources. Are they credible? Are they not credible? You want to participate in that so that way you can make an informed decision, because any organization that wants you to feel good about it all the time, that's culty. That's a red flag. That is a slow down, put the brakes on, and explore. Get curious because something's wonky here.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything else to share, Mason. Do you?
I don't think so.
All right.
We've gone a little bit long. Thank you guys for sticking with us. It's been good.
Yeah, we're just under 2 hours for our emotional control. So next week we will be closing out our cult series with perpetual inadequacy. That's what we're going to be talking about next week.
And
Thank
closing
you so
out season
much.
1, right? Is that going to be the last episode of season 1?
Yeah, that will be
So
the
we'll
final
start again in
season.
September?
Yes. So we are starting in September with, I think what we're scheduled is the anniversary. Did we do what we tried to do? So we're going to review episode number 1 that we did, and we're going to analyze and critique ourselves as to how we feel we did. Success or not. And you don't need to write it down, Mason. I've got it written down right here, unless you want to.
I don't look at your notes.
You do whatever the hell you want. Then we're doing a special episode on September 6th. We are going to celebrate the September 6th, six truth speakers in Mormon history who were excommunicated. I chose to have my book release on September 6th in order to honor the September 6th. Because I feel that my book, I worked really hard to be a truth teller. So that is what that one's going to be about. And then after that, we've got some exciting guests that are coming on. We've got all kinds of things. I'm going to be reaching out to Luna, Lindsey, Corbden and asking if they would be willing to come on our podcast and talk to us about how we utilized their material. Whether or not they are able to do that, I don't know. I can't make that commitment for them, but we are going to reach out to them. So hang in there. We are really excited about season 2. So we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page.
Because frankly, I don't want to hurt you. You're my spouse. I love you. I want us to have a positive relationship. If I can understand how what I did hurt you, I'm much more likely to avoid it in the future.
Alex, I need that put into a little sound bite on my phone so that way when Mason gets grumpy, I can just play it for him. No, I agree with you 100%. In fact, in
Hey, Alex, can I get that in a little soundbite, please? I agree with you 100%. I'm going to need that. That's going to be a ringtone for sure. It's going to come up now. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%.
All right,
I
Brad.
need that in my life.
All right, Brad. Alex, you're fired if you do that. No, I'm just teasing. Oh shoot, what was I going to say? I do agree with you 100%. Oh, that's what it was. When
So
they
saying
do,
it again triggered your... I like this. I like this is where this is going.
Hey, Mason,
Carry on, sweetheart. Carry
what
on.
does this middle finger
I don't know. I can't
all
see
by
you.
itself mean?
What middle? I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, here's the second one. Do I need to pump them in the air like this?
I still don't understand.